It's a bunch of propaganda that, the New Deal supposedly prolonged the Depression. One of the things that people point to as quote unquote evidence is the double dip recession in 1936/1937. They talk about how the economy basically started to recover but then went back down around that period of time. And, you know, I researched this one pretty heavily, and what I ended up finding out is that FDR had a bunch of advisors, and one of the things that they had told him is that, the economy was recovering at that point, so it made sense to cut back on spending and everything, which is basically, and potentially raise taxes and, to recover what they had done stimulating the economy, because it was on the road to recovery and everything. And so what FDR did was effectively enact austerity in 1936 plus 1937, and then the economy went downhill. So that's not what it's been painted as. It's not an example of the New Deal, prolonging the Depression, as so many writers have falsely alleged. It is really sad to see that, it's been it's been as long as it has been, and Republicans are still trying to tear apart his legacy. What failed in 1936 was not an example of the New Deal at all. It was FDR's pivot to austerity, and having listened to his finance people, that did this in. If we had kept spending at the rate that we had been spending and everything, the economy never would have gone into a depression. That's what the evidence suggests, and everything into a second, depression, and that's what the evidence suggests. So fuck you, to all these writers and authors like Emily Shales and whatnot. You're dead wrong. Your analysis has no basis in reality. We've looked into this before. Austerity in 19... Even NPR, has come out with an article with All Things Considered when austerity turned to disaster. 4 years into Franklin Roosevelt's presidential term, the worst of the Great Depression seemed behind him. Massive jolts of New Deal spending had stopped the economic slide, and the unemployment rate was cut from 22% to less than 10%. People felt there was momentum. U.S. historian Donald Ritchie tells Guy Raz, host of the weekend's All Things Considered, finally there was light at the end of the tunnel. So Roosevelt, on the advice of his conservative Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, decided to tackle the exploding deficits. Over 2 years, FDR slashed government spending 17%. All of a sudden, after unemployment had been going steadily down, unemployment shot up, the economy stagnated, and the stock markets crashed again. And now it seemed would come out of the Hoover Depression and to go into the Roosevelt recession. Similar decisions Roosevelt made about its spending and austerity are being discussed at the White House right now. In the long term, both political parties say that they agree that austerity is a good thing, but what about in the short term while unemployment remains high? Both parties are dead wrong. Austerity is objectively a bad thing, and anybody who disagrees is delusional. It is, and there is never a good time for austerity. It is always a bad idea, no matter what. Not even if the national debt was 50,000 times what it is, it would still be a terrible idea. There is never a good time for austerity, ever. Period. It is always a bad idea, and if you're a Democrat who thinks it's a good idea, we should drive you out of the party with pitchforks and torches. You are not welcome here. The tent should be too small to include anybody who supports austerity. Get the fuck out. Go become a Republican, because you are not a Democrat. And if there is bipartisan consensus about that, then the bipartisan consensus needs to end, and we need a viciously partisan Democratic Party who opposes austerity. Fuck you if you're a Democrat who supports it. Get out of my party! I don't want you in it! Economists disagree about what caused the 1937 recession. Unemployment jumped 3% the year after FDR cut spending. At the same time, the Federal Reserve built its reserve, which means the banks had less to lend.
and the payroll tax had just been introduced. But some, including Bruce Bartlett, who held senior policy positions under President Reagan and George H.W. Bush, fear that major budget cuts the size of proposed by Obama, $4 trillion over 10 years, could be dangerous to short-term recovery. Former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers is also worried. Rushing to deficit reduction was Roosevelt's mistake in 1937, and that would be a serious mistake today, he tells Raz. He points out that the current budget negotiations are different from those in 1937. Proposals under consideration today would spread cuts over 10 years instead of FDR's 2. But this was published back in 2010, so it was a vicious debunking of a lot of the lies that have been spread about the New Deal. You know, but Summers says it may still be too soon for austerity. The right strategy is stimulus now and more deficit reduction program for after the economy has recovered. Last year's compromise on a payroll tax suspension, he says, an example of what may be politically possible given the spending impasse between Democrats and Republicans. You know, we say that in a technical sense, the recession is over. That means the economy is growing. But when you walk through the Grand Canyon, you're going uphill long before you get back to sea level. And I think we've got several years before the economy is back to normal levels of employment. What economists missed in the years leading up to the recession, journalist Gillian Tent was one of the first people to warn that something new and dangerous was happening in the global credit market. She was named British Journalist of the Year in 2009. Today, she's the U.S. Managing Editor for the Financial Times. She has a doctorate in finance, but not in finance, but in anthropology. And that's one of the reasons she says economists like Summers don't have all the answers. Because right now, issues like social cohesion are crucial for understanding what's going on. America is not a country which has a strong sense of resource constraint. It was created by pioneers who came in here believing that there would always be more resources, and there's been such a focus on growing the economic pie that people haven't really stopped to ask, how do you divide up that economic pie? European direct investors and policymakers, by contrast, can't wrap their head around the U.S. debt clock, she says. They find it quite unbelievable that a country would, in a sense, choose to walk into a debt crisis, given that people in Europe are having a debt crisis imposed on them without a choice. There's a sense of incomprehension that politicians can't sit around the table and come up with some sort of proactive plan. Summers' forecast of several more years without normal levels of employment is sobering, she adds. It makes a question of social cohesion and whether America has a way of allocating pain even more pertinent. Social divisions are widening in America. Economic income inequality is growing. Tet warns that that may create even more tensions going forward. And I love America, but she says, I think it's got much to be proud of. I just really hope it finds a way to tackle these problems. And it hasn't, Now, by 2026, 15 years after this article came out, the fact of the matter is that, there's at least 6 or 9, I forget which it is, factories that are on fire, essentially, as a violent protest against the fact that, when companies don't pay a livable wage, the cost of living is so goddamn high, and the wages are not keeping up with the cost of living in this country all over the place, and so factory after factory is now burning and everything as a working class protest against the whole thing. So social cohesion is falling apart. Clearly. The rebellion has begun, the revolution has begun, and the fact of the matter is that the reactions on social media have been, it's about fucking time. People are pissed.